Welcome to the Ultimate Patcher Tutorial 2024. In this video I'm going to show you the best way to use Patcher, how links work, how to build a great looking UI, how to build more complex chains and keep it organized, and of course how you can build your very first Patcher preset. This video is more for beginners, though even if you already use Patcher for a while, I bet there's a lot of stuff in there you didn't know, but I also plan on making another video soon with more advanced tricks that you can see in the future. Now let's jump right into it. So the first thing you have to understand about Patcher is that there are basically two different versions of Patcher. You can see if I type Patcher here, then there's first the instrument version of Patcher and there's also the effects version of Patcher. The main difference between the two versions is basically that for the instrument version you get a MIDI signal as an input and an audio signal as an output, and for the effects version you get an audio signal as an input and also an audio signal as an output. I hope that makes sense. So here's the best way to navigate in Patcher. You can use Ctrl plus the scroll wheel to zoom vertically and Alt plus the scroll wheel to zoom horizontally, so exactly the opposite of the playlist. Great job, image line. And you can also use Shift plus the scroll wheel to just zoom in both directions. To move around, the best way is to press the middle mouse button and just drag it around. Let's start by adding our first plugin. There are two different ways to do that. Either you can right click and add plugin and you'll get this tree menu here, or of course you can also just press F8 and let's add Fruity Reverb to the scene, and you can just click and drag it into it. Also, let's say there already is a connection and you want to put the plugin into the connection, you can basically do the same thing but drag it into the yellow line and it will appear in the yellow line basically. So let's go over the different type of routings, aka links. There are of course the yellow lines, those are always audio signals. There are also green lines like this one or here. Those are MIDI signals. I don't know why ImageLine decided to call them events, but they are MIDI, okay. There are also red lines. There aren't any here right now, but we'll get to them later. And red lines are parameter values. You can always easily reconnect links just like this, or if you want to disconnect them completely, just drag them into the void and let go. Alternatively, you can also right-click the connection and just deselect it or select it if you want to connect it. And it will do the same thing. For audio links, so only the yellow ones, you can also adjust the volume with this thing here, or you can right-click it to mute it, or right-click again to unmute, of course. So let's start with an example. I have the synth sound here. But of course, as you can hear, it still sounds pretty dry, it needs some reverb, and I think we should add some reverb with a little twist. So what we want to do is sidechain the reverb to the dry audio signal. This is a very common trick, especially for vocals to, for example, make the words more easily understandable. So the first thing we need for that is of course reverb, so let's add some Fruity Reverb. But since we only want to sidechain the reverb, it's a good idea to keep the reverb in parallel, so basically in a separate string. But of course with the mix at 100% and the dry at 0. So right now we already have the reverb pretty much, but it's not sidechained yet. So how are we going to do that? I would use Fruity Limiter. So let's add some Fruity Limiter on the reverb. And what we need to do is sidechain the dry signal to Fruity Limiter. So we have to right click on Fruity Limiter, inputs audio, add one, this is the sidechain input basically, and connect the dry signal to that. So let's open Fruity Limiter. And what we want to do is just go to compression, select the sidechain input, I think it's already automatically set correctly, and adjust the threshold until it gets picked up, and the ratio. And now we already have Sidechain Reverb, it's that easy. By the way, one thing you might have noticed is every time I double click a plugin, it automatically closes all the other plugins. If you don't want that, you just have to hold Alt, and then it won't happen and it will open them. Additional. Now of course we don't just want that chain, but we also want a nice UI, and for that let's go to the surface. To add new buttons you can either go on the plus sign here or just also right click on the void and add them from here. I'll just add a normal knob and let's call that Sidechain Amount. So now we have this button called Sidechained Amount, and if you go to the map we can see that this red dot, this red connection basically, is this knob. At the moment it's not connected to anything, so of course it doesn't do anything. So what we can do is just double click on Fruity Limiter and just think about, what is the amount here? The amount is basically this ratio knob. So what you can do is right click and activate it, and you will see it appears here as a red knob too that you can connect it to. Now a very important thing is that maybe we don't just want to use FL Studio native plugins, but also some third-party plugins. For example, let's say we don't want Fruity Reverb 2, but instead Raum by Native Instruments. To delete a plugin, just right click it and delete it. I'm just gonna search for Raum, and you can add it like all native plugins too to the list. So far so good, but one problem that non-native plugins have is that if you want to use the same method I just used with Fruity Limiter, just right-click and activate, if I right-click on that, nothing happens. So how are we going to control the knobs here? Well, it can sometimes be a bit tedious, but it's not especially complicated. You just have to right-click the plugin icon and go on Inputs, Parameters, and just choose the knob you want to control here. Let's say I want to control the decay time, then select that, and it's also here as a red knob. So let's duplicate this knob and make another one and call it decay. So the second one is pretty easy. Let's just connect decay to the decay time. And if we open the plugin and see, the decay time controls the decay time. Great, exactly what we want. Now for the sidechain amount, it's a little bit more complicated because of course I could just connect it to what we just activated in Fruity Limiter 2, and then it would also control the knob pretty intuitively. But there's one problem, because if the sidechain amount is on 0, it's actually a negative value here basically. If I play something, the reverb gets louder instead of just not doing anything at all, which would be more intuitive for the sidechain amount being on 0. What we want is basically, if the sidechain amount is on 0, this should be on 50%. And if the sidechain amount is on 50%, this should be on 75% and so on. Luckily, there's a very easy way to do that in Patcher, and that's just going on the map. And let's use Fruity XYZ controller. You could also use Fruity XY controller. That's basically the same thing, but older and worse. So let's use Fruity XYZ controller and put it into the scene. Now right click, go to Inputs, Parameters, and activate the X value. You could also just activate X, Y, and Z value, but we only need one thing for this example. So let's only activate X value, and also in the outputs also activate the X value. Now connect our sidechain amount to the X value and connect the output of the X value to what we control in Fruity Limiter. Now why are we doing this? The great thing about Fruity XYZ controller is that if we open it and go on input mapping or output mapping, it doesn't really matter for this example, we can basically choose what the output value is for each input value. So the x-axis is the input, the y-axis is the output. So let's think again about what we wanted. We wanted if the input value is at 0, the output value is at 50%. So input value at 0, output value at 50%. Input value, here 0, output value 50%. If the input value is at 100%, the output value should also be at 100%. So this is also great, and because I'm very good at maths, I know that this is a linear function, so this is the correct function for these circumstances. You can also just speed and acceleration. Usually you can use them as the default or put them on 0, so all the changes are immediate. And if we just try again now, we can see that it does exactly what we want. If it's at 0, the ratio is also at 0, or the knob position is at 50%. And if it's at 100%, then the ratio is at 100%. So let's try it again. A lot of sidechain here. No sidechain here. Great. I think we need some more controls, so let's just add some more buttons. We can just duplicate them. Let's also add size. Let's also add size. Let's also add volume for the reverb, of course. Reverb, volume. And maybe let's also add threshold for the sidechain. How do you write threshold? Holy shit. Threshold, I hope. And let's connect them too. You can see the names of the knobs by just going over them, and then you can see them on the top left in the info bar. So this is the size, this is reverb volume, this is threshold. Let's go on Raum again, inputs, parameters, let's select size. Oh my god. I think I on accident selected size instead of decay before, but let's fix that very quickly. Let's select decay and connect the decay knob to the decay knob and the size knob to the size knob. Also, one thing I completely forgot is that the mix should be at 100%, of course. I didn't think about it. And now if we try again, yeah, now the decay actually controls the decay and the size actually controls the size. Great. Now for the reverb volume, I think we can just use the gain knob inside Fruity Limiter. So let's activate that and connect the reverb volume to that. And for the threshold, obviously connect it to the threshold. Activate the threshold. And we're done. Now one thing I would always do is to rename all your controllers to what they actually do. If your patcher preset is as small as this one, it doesn't matter that much, of course, but once they get a bit larger, it's extremely important to keep things organized. So let's just rename FruityXYZ controller to sidechain amount. So we know this is the XYZ controller that controls the sidechain amount. Now we have our great user interface here, but to be honest, it still looks kind of ugly. So I'm going to show you how to easily make a user interface that immediately looks a lot better. So let's just right click and add a bevel. I'm just going to use a default bevel so we can choose a background color. Also right click and go on grid and select 10 pixels. No, let's do 20 pixels. So it snaps to the grid and everything can be on a grid, I guess. I think a nice background color for this would be a little bit on the darker side. Let's do something like this. Now let's add another bevel and put it on top and make it like a title bar. For the title, let's do a label, a default label. Do it Sidechain Reverb. Let's go. Of course, this is way too small still, so right click, properties, font height. The maximum font height is 48, I think, so let's do that. Also right click and hide the buttons, so disable show buttons. If you don't know how to switch between edit and normal mode, then you can just left click and click E to do that. Easy. Now let's move that to the side here. This one too. I think what color scheme we might want to give this plugin. I think let's do blue maybe. So let's just do dark blue here. Now our knobs are still very unorganized, so maybe let's separate them into the knobs that control the reverb and the knobs that control the sidechaining. So decay controls the reverb, reverb volume controls the reverb, sidechain amount controls sidechain, threshold and controls sidechain, and size controls reverb. Let's just reorganize them a little bit. Let's also give the knobs different colors. So I'm just gonna remove our background so I can easily select them all. Right click and go on colors of the pep, I guess. Let's select the same color as the background. And also the color of the rail. Let's also select the same color. And also the color of the fill. I think that should be something blue, similar to the theme of the plugin, maybe a bit brighter. And now the color of the fill when it's pressed, that's the same color, but even a bit brighter. So what we have now is these colors. If you move your mouse over it, it gets a bit brighter. Let's actually make the background a bit darker even. I think it could be a bit darker. Nice. And let's add some more bevels, a default bevel that's a little bit brighter to highlight the parts where the knobs are. Let's go for a color somewhere like this. Now let's right click and go on a 10 pixel grid, to give us some more control. Like this. Let's duplicate that. Like this. Oh, let's actually add another one in this color to highlight the title even more. And of course, that's not the greatest UI I've ever made, but I think it's already pretty passable. And we still have some space in the bottom right corner, and I think that's a good opportunity to add a bypass knob. So just right click, go on button, and I'm just gonna select this preset and do a little bypass knob. Right click on properties, caption, bypass. Oops. Oh, bypass. And we again have a knob here. And how are we going to do a bypass? There's a simple way to do that. One way is to use Fruity Mute. So let's just search for that because I don't think it's in my favorites. Fruity Mute 2. Let's go. And for our plugin, it's actually especially simple because to bypass it, we just have to disable the wet signal because the dry signal goes through either way. So let's put Fruity Mute on the reverb signal. On the end, of course, because otherwise you would still hear the tail if you disable it. And right click on the mute channel activated and connected. And now if I play some sounds here, it's off. And if it's pressed, it's on. That's exactly the wrong way around, so we have to fix that using another channel in our XYZ controller. So enable the Y value 2 and the Y value here 2. Reconnect it like this. Rename it, of course. And let's go on the Y channel input mapping, and what we want is just the other way around, so just invert it basically. Also, another thing we have to do, you might have noticed that if we click on this button, we have to hold to basically keep it up. But we want it to be a switch that we click once and then it switches the polarity, and if we click it again, it switches back. So how are we going to do that? It's just right click, properties, and activate stay down. And now it will always stay down. So let's check again and see if it works now. Now it does exactly what we want. So let's just adjust the color scheme a little bit more. So now it's blue, fitting to the rest of the patcher preset. And I would say we're done with our patcher presets. The last thing I want to show you is how to save your patcher preset. It's actually very easy. The first thing I would do is just make it a little bit smaller, because the size that you save it with will also the size you open it with when you open it. Now just go on this drop-down menu, save preset as, and make yourself a directory. I mean, I can make a new directory here. Just call it subscribe, because that's what you should do. And just call your preset, for example, Sidechain Reverb, and hit enter. Whenever you want to get your preset, just open Patcher and go on your directory and select it, and it will just load the preset. I think that covers most of the basics for Patcher, and keep in mind I'm going to do a video with a lot more advanced stuff about Patcher soon, so watch out for that, and until next time.